right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here today. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation about the challenges and future of college press freedom as part of Student Press Freedom Day 2024. I'm Mike Haston, Senior Legal Counsel at the Student Press Law Center. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Student Press Law Center is the nation's only nonprofit group devoted exclusively to providing legal support and training to student journalists and to advocating for their First Amendment and free press rights. Each year, we've organized Student Press Freedom Day as an opportunity for all of us to bring attention to the important role that student journalists play in their communities, to highlight the challenges they face from censorship or otherwise, and to take steps to address those challenges and to advance student press freedom. For those of you who don't know, SPLC actually turns 50 years old this year, and I've been working here since 1989. I mean, the truth is college media has always had its challenges. I mean, that's kind of why I've had a job over the last 35 years, but during this last 3 decades, I don't think I've ever seen student journalists face the sort of challenges, the tough challenges as they're doing now. I mean, now they are at the epicenter of cultural battles and political battles, and those battles never seem to end in our 24/7 news cycles. They have to figure out whether a state TikTok ban applies to their social media accounts. They have the relatively new threat of hostility to journalists that doesn't seem to be abating anytime soon. And they have to figure out how to pay their bills as the pandemic and the challenging media landscapes have affected the student media business model just as it has the professional one. I mean, the reality is that we certainly can't have college student press freedom if we don't have a college press. That said, student journalists are doing a wonderful job doing some amazing reporting. We're going to hear some of that from Nicole and what's been going on at the Daily Northwestern. And these days, I mean, the weird thing is that they're often, the only reporters that are regularly covering their campus, as traditional news media outlets have often shrunk or closed. And in addition, they're sometimes the only news organization in town. And many have actually had to expand some of their roles to help kind of fill those gaps in the news deserts, we call them. We certainly cannot cover every challenge today, but our speakers, I hope, are going to help us dive into a few of them and hopefully give us all a bit of hope for the future. To lead the conversation, we're very lucky to have our dear friend, Jackie Alexander, Director of Student Media at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and President of the College Media Association. Jackie.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Mike. I'm really excited to be here today with a lot of folks that are making a lot of strides for press freedom and for college media. I think it's really imperative that we continue to strive for press freedom and that we continue to support the Student Press Law Center. And so super happy to be here with y'all today. We know that the college media landscape is challenging, as Mike said earlier. We have the addition of COVID-19, financial implications, the looming higher education enrollment cliff, and honestly, blatant and unacceptable online harassment of our students doing their jobs well. I think we really find ourselves at a watershed moment where we work to persist or we choose to expire. So we have a lot to cover today, a couple of ground rules. So I'm going to introduce each speaker. I'm going to allow them to give some background on their experiences and then I'll ask them some questions. At the end, if we have time left over, we will open it to the audience for questions. You're welcome to send questions in the chat during their talking points, and I may pull from some of those. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a trailblazer, Nicole Markus, over at the Daily Northwestern. She is the staff managing editor, and she was part of the reporting team that uncovered the extent of hazing, sexual assault, and racism from Northwestern University's football team, leading to the firing of their head coach. So I wanted to ask you, Nicole, before your reporting that we're all pretty familiar with because this was a national story, the university had received some complaints of hazing and conducted an investigation into the football team. Talk to us a little bit about how your reporting started and the process that you underwent.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks all for having me. Very excited. I would say, we initially heard that there was something going on in January. And at the time, it was just a press release from the university saying we've started an independent investigation with an outside firm, and they're going to be looking at, what's going on this team because we've received some complaints. And so, at the time, I was actually in DC for another reporting program that Northwestern offers. It's Medill on the Hill. So that was a really great experience too. But I wasn't as involved with the initial investigation and everything that was happening there. But I know, some reporters were looking into it and kind of not really having any luck. It was pretty tight-lipped over there, which makes sense considering there was, a huge investigation going on. And then in July, we continue to operate over the summer because we are not only Northwestern's only daily publication, but we're also one of Evanston's only daily publication. So we, continue reporting over the summer to make sure that we're continuing our coverage for everybody who lives in Evanston. Um, and on July 7th, the university released a press release basically saying that the independent investigation had found that hazing had occurred on the team. There were no details of that. And so we kind of said, okay, we really have to look into this now, see what's going on. And within a few hours, we received an email from the whistleblower who outlined everything that he had also detailed to the university. And so with that, we kind of started reporting on the story. We knew that we had to move fast. And talked to him that night for several hours, verified his identity, and also verified that the claims he was making to us were the same that he had made to the university. Of course, we reached out to the university for comment, got comment from them, and talked to a few other players on the team. And then our story was released the next morning, July 8th, at around noon.
Awesome. Thank you. So, looking back at the process, it sounds like you did a lot of things right. You verified the identity of your whistleblower. You reached out to the university for content. You moved fast, but you moved smart. But sometimes hindsight is 2020. So, when you look back on the process, is there anything you might have done differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say everything was extremely fast. We found out about this obviously morning of July 7th and then reported the story out in less than 24 hours, which is great for getting the story out fast. But obviously, there's some details that we didn't have time to verify or we couldn't verify immediately and decided not to include those right away, which I think, going back, it would have been nice to have all of those things verified. But obviously, we couldn't include what we didn't have, other sources on the record for or anything like that. So I think, everything's a learning experience, and there's definitely things throughout the process that we would have done differently. I think primarily outside of the story, this was a really stressful time for the team of four who were working on this. It all started on a Friday, and by Monday afternoon, former coach Pat Fitzgerald had been fired. So it was a 72-hour thing. And in that time, we weren't sleeping, we were barely eating, you know, showering was not our priority. So definitely just taking a step back and realizing that we were doing all that we could, and to kind of like take the immense pressure that we felt on ourselves a little bit off would have definitely been something that I would have emphasized to the other reporters on the team too. But, hindsight for sure. Next time.
Yeah, no, definitely. That actually leads into my next question. Once that story came out, it immediately became national news. And unfortunately, some of your staff, as I understand, experienced death threats. So, how did you manage that challenge and support your staff holistically?
Yeah, I mean, before we put out the story, I had a conversation with our team and basically just said, hey, anybody's name who's on this, you're putting yourself at risk of, criticism. If something goes wrong with the story, that's your reputation on the line. So we just had a conversation before the story even went out, just to make sure everybody understood the risks and was comfortable with having their name on it. And then, of course, we knew that, um, let me just start with this. Pat Fitzgerald is a fixture in the Northwestern community. He has been for many, many years, decades. And so there are a lot of people who are really supportive of him. And anytime you put out a story that's pretty critical of the football program as a whole, is going to have blowback on him because he was the football program at Northwestern. And so we knew that, his supporters were going to be very upset, and some of that might be directed at us. But for the most part, I will say we had so much support from the people around us that it kind of made up for, the few people online who maybe weren't um, talking to us the way that they should. Especially the Medill faculty. We were not working out of our normal newsroom because we were all living kind of closer to the Medill building. So we all were just working out of there because it was just easier to go back and forth. And the Medill faculty they were all in that building, just being extremely supportive of us, offering us any advice that we may need, or just, being there to buy us a coffee or whatever it may be. So that was really nice to have the people around us be extremely supportive of us. And anything else, we just tried to block out, knowing that, this was bound to happen. There's always going to be people online who don't agree, but knowing that we did the best we could, and also that our reporting, nobody claimed that our reporting was incorrect. So that was just something we stood by, just knowing that we did everything we could and we made the best decision we could have as students. We're all, 19, 20 years old. So this is the first time any of us have ever had to experience anything like that. So just knowing that we did the best we could, honestly.
Awesome. Reporting a big story like this, honestly, it can profoundly change someone's life. It can change the entire trajectory. It can be, I don't want to pursue journalism anymore, or this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. What are lessons that you learned from reporting on that story that you carry forward to this day?
Yeah, I think primarily, we knew this would affect our lives, but we also were more concerned about how this would affect everybody who was involved with the story. That being, the victims of hazing, the coaches on the team, everybody who could potentially lose a job over this, or, maybe there were a lot of people transferring from Northwestern, so completely changing the trajectory of their college experience. All of that was really important to us and what we were focusing on more than ourselves, because we really wanted to center their stories in this. And I think, sometimes the story kind of shifted a little bit to, oh, these four student journalists broke this story, which is what we didn't want. We just so happen to be students, but we're also, members of this community, and we've um, reported on the football team, obviously, for years and years and years. And so it's not out of the picture that we would get this story over maybe a national um, journalism publication, because we're covering them every day. So we just wanted to make sure we were keeping the focus on the players. Um, the lesson that I learned was that I didn't realize that this would turn into as big of a story as it did. Obviously, I knew that there were going to be a lot of people talking about it on campus, but it was genuinely a shock to me how fast it blew up online. And so, it kind of taught me that even though we are students, our words do have impact, and they can make a big difference in, the trajectory of other people's lives, which is kind of shocking because, everybody makes a joke like, oh, student journalists are only covering events or things like that. They're not doing actually consequential journalism, but this was obviously turned into something that had far-reaching consequences. So just that we can have an impact and we do have an impact was really important, and that I do like investigative journalism and that I thrive in situations like this where there's high stress levels, was also something that I learned for sure.
Awesome. I think you touched a little bit about being a member of the Northwestern community. I think it's really challenging at times for student journalists to be both part of the community and then reporting on their world, which is their university. And it's a very small microcosm. So, how has it been for you and the other students that reported on this issue navigating the campus as both a community member and a journalist?
Yeah, it was really tough, especially at the time, because this is a really sad story, I think, for everybody involved. There's no winners here. Um, and so that was something that we were just kind of struggling with at first, is knowing that this was going to have a big impact on the people who were involved with the story, and knowing that, some of these people we've maybe been in class with before or seen walking around, or maybe, even know through other friends. on campus. And that's definitely something that's different about student journalism, is that you are directly immersed in the community. And, that is difficult not only in this situation, but in others, when maybe you have to report on something that your friends are involved with, or, that you have directly witnessed or anything like that. And it's hard for sure. I will say, after the story, it it's still ongoing, so it's not over yet. But after, the majority of the story had come to a conclusion and things were slowing down in the news cycle, two of us actually went abroad. So I was abroad fall quarter, and so was another reporter. So that was kind of nice to just kind of take a step back from campus, let things settle down a little bit, and then come back in January. For sure made a difference for me. But I think, all of us have been navigating okay. Um, People, for the most part, understand that we did what we had to do. Um, but it wasn't easy at first, for sure. And it's definitely something that I think is really important when reporting on a story like this, is to remember that we do have ties in the community, and to try and make sure that we're doing the best we can to remain objective in those situations.
Right. So the theme of Student Press Freedom Day from SPLC this year is powerfully persistent. And I think to be persistent, you have there might be a moment where there's a little bit of doubt, where you say, maybe we don't continue to pursue this. Can you talk to me if there was that moment where there might have been some doubt, or might have been some concern, and how you moved through that uncomfortable situation to get to this story?
Yeah, I would say there was concern and doubt from the second we received that email to, long after we published our initial story, as we were continuing reporting. And I think that doubt is actually very healthy, to a good story, because if you're just extremely confident in what you're doing and not concerned at all about making sure you're getting the details right, you're probably not being thorough. And so, we had a lot of conversations that first night about, are we doing the right thing here? Have we verified everything we possibly could? Did we talk to enough people? Um, is this going to damage, our relationship with our community, everything like that? And we talked through those things. And, I didn't sleep that night for more than an hour, but just like before we put out the story the next morning, we talked again about it. After the story was put out that first morning, everything was fine for a few hours, and then some football players came online and started saying that they didn't agree with the story, or that things were overblown. And so that was another moment of doubt. But then we had other publications the next day putting out stories corroborating the initial report from other players. So we pushed through that way. And then when we put out the story on the racism piece, there was again conversations about, were we doing the right thing? Again, conversations about how we verified this as much as we can. And just continuing through that, I think, was actually really important, to just ensuring that we had a story that was well thought out and reported the way that we should have reported it. If we didn't have those conversations, I think we probably would have made a mistake at some point. So I'm glad that we did.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you to you and your team for all your work and for being here today. We're going to transition a little bit. We're going to talk to Jessica Sparks. So Jessica Sparks is a doctoral student at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. She was the lead researcher on a newly released study of college media by the Brechner Freedom of Information Project at UF. So she's going to tell us a little bit about that study. She has some slides for us to review, and tell us what her team found out about the independence of college news outlets. So Jessica, I'm turning it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate the warm welcome and everything. And Nicole, I'm just in awe of how much work you guys have been doing. I pay close attention to Northwestern, and have been for about a year now, it feels like. So anyway, yeah, so here at the Brechner Project, we've been focusing on college media independence for about 3 years, with a study that was funded by Lumina Foundation. And we started this when Frank Lamont was still here as our director. And if you don't know that name, he was with the Student Press Law Center for quite a long time as the director. And that's actually how I knew him, because I was a student media advisor prior to coming to start my PhD here at the University of Florida. And so when I came here and he said, hey, we want to do this project to look at how COVID-19 has really affected this very important part of community journalism, which is college media, I was like, yeah, sure, I want to be on it. And I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of see it through before I graduate this year with my PhD. So we have released the report. I'm so excited to see it like out there. And in addition to that, one of the big things we really wanted to have out for our community was an interactive map. And I'll show you that in just a minute. But some key findings I just wanted to share with everybody. Some key findings we found in our research or give us some really good idea of what's going on in this particular sect of college media, or of journalism, sorry. So some things to start out with before we move forward is, you know, what do we call and what do we see as independence in this sector, right? And how does that compare to, you know, traditional media, commercial media, even you know, scholastic media, so K through 12 systems? How does this really compare? And the big things that we look at are actually broken down when we're looking at independence altogether. We're breaking it down into three pieces. That's the financial piece, you know, where are you getting your money from? The editorial piece, who's making those decisions on what gets published? And then finally, the structural aspect, like where's the newsroom located? How do you get computers and software, and, you know, where does it get sent after you're ready, if you're going to get it published? And who's hosting the website? Really, really down and dirty aspects of the day-to-day operations for these outlets. And now the hardcore traditional mindset of independence says that, you know, you should not get any money from the institution, and no faculty or staff should be involved in the production, and you shouldn't be using any facility for free from the institution, and to remain that, like, to keep that split, right, from being truly independent and being able to report on your community in the most third party way possible as a student of that same community, right? But that's not the reality. That's not really sustainable for most outlets in the United States. And that's what we really were aiming to identify, is like, what does this actually look like on the ground? So what we ended up doing was looking at universities with 4-year programs of 5,000 or more students in the year 2020, 2021. So, because a few of our outlets, since we first started this project, have the enrollment has changed at the institution. So not many, but a couple. That was initially where we were going there. And then finally, we were looking at students' papers of record, and I'm going to call it that because of that news desert mentality. Because one big thing we know from the news desert studies is that, you know, just because a newspaper is not there, it doesn't mean they're not getting news coverage. It just means they're not getting the type of depth and significant coverage that we see at a daily newspaper in that community. And basically what we did was we had a group of fantastic student researchers who we trained and we worked with, and we were able to contact and talk to about 512 student news outlets in the country out of 525 we could even find. About 13 of those we think went underwater or shuttered during the time between the beginning and the end of this project, which is really concerning, but we haven't had a chance to like go and talked to those specific outlets yet. Some things we came out of this research with is that out of all of those outlets, we could verify very easily that about 56% get some sort of funding, like true just money in hand from their institution, whether that's direct allocations from the administration or if it's something like the student government is giving part of a student activity fee to the organization, or something along those lines. And that's that sets us up for some vulnerable moments if you are hitting the wrong note with certain people on campus, or if if there is an enrollment decline or something like that, what does that bring to the table for the news outlet? And does it affect the quality and the ability of the news outlet to be able to do what it does best? Additionally, out of these 512, only 52 were found to be independent 501c3s. And the reason that's important is because even if they get money from the institution as a 501c3, there's a huge buffer. There's a big gap between the students who are actually doing the on-the-ground reporting and the institution that's providing the funding. And so for us, that was really important to find out. And one big thing that came out of this is that out of those 52, the majority of them are these huge institutions. Like, I'm really lucky to be here at the University of Florida with, like tens of thousands of students. But those are the institutions that can afford to have the 501c3s. Or the other way is these super selective, highly elite. So all of the Ivy League schools have 501c3s. But I used to work at a state institution of less than 5,000 students. And so I can tell you from experience, there's no way we could have kept a 501c3 going in that kind of a setting. And so that barrier isn't always available to everybody in this community. Some other things that we found were that about 59% of our outlets that we identified had university paid advisors, whether that was a faculty, could be tenure track or not, or a staff member. They had these university paid advisors, and that also sets us up for some big problems as far as vulnerability is concerned, because, as somebody who has gone through it, I can't tell you how many times a colleague has come up to me and been like, oh, you might have made somebody on the tenure and promotion committee really upset with that last article the students published. And I'm like, I didn't do the article. I'm just supporting my students and helping them. And, having to play that political role as both a colleague and an ethical advisor, somebody who actually supports their students and doesn't want to stand in their way, is a really problematic system for the people who are paid by the university. And luckily, we're starting to see some more protections built in, especially for the new voices legislation that's been going through in some states, but that's not always the case. And sometimes that's not as straightforward as we'd like it to be. So that was really interesting too, to see like how high that number was. And then finally, we could verify about 35% of that 500 got both. And that's really our most vulnerable population, in our opinion. And so we want to find ways eventually to help out these really important outlets and protect them, while also remembering that, money doesn't grow off of the trees outside. And so moving forward, we know for a fact that this is not all inclusive, and we want to move that bar higher and start to get in the community colleges and the smaller universities, the ones that, I think personally do have the most problems keeping enrollment up, and that really does trickle down to the services students can do and can offer. We also know, and I'll show you the research in a minute, or show you the map in a minute, that the way that we've categorized things is, we were looking for the item that would make you the most vulnerable to censorship or pressure or impact. But oftentimes there's multiple items happening. So, you might be getting money from the institution, but you might also have a 501c3, or you might have a faculty advisor but not get any money from the institution, or there's a lot of different setups there, and there's not one single setup that we could find in any particular direction. And then finally, it's too early to tell for a lot of it, but the new voices legislation, it's really important for us to keep an eye on, where is it doing what it's supposed to, and where is it not, and what can we do to strengthen it as we continue to move forward and get more and more states on board, and hopefully a national new voices legislation, which would be great. And so, like I said, what we're actually really most excited about, because this is who we all are, is our new voices, or sorry, our map of college newsrooms. And I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see that, or do I need to change my?
Yep, I think we're just still seeing your presentation.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna stop doing that and do the new share. And I don't want to take up more time, because actually I was really excited to hear Nicole more than anybody. But on the SPLC website, and many newsrooms should have gotten a bunch of emails that were really annoying from me personally. On the SPLC website, excuse me, we have a map that actually shows all of the college news outlets we could find in this data set. So again, 5,000 and more enrollment. And then you can, as a user, go in and actually change and filter out what kind of newsroom structure you're looking for. So if you want to see all the 501c3s, you can easily do that. And you can see exactly where they're located, and we can see, like, there's a straight shot in certain parts, and there's definitely empty areas of the country. And then of course we have it filterable by many different structures. So if you want to see places that we could identify that had the faculty or staff advisor, we could see that too. And then also on this same website, you can actually access our full report. It was a long haul for quite a few of us, but that full report kind of goes into detail about, hey, we're not trying to make a judgment call. We're not telling you you're not being good because you get money from the institution or you have a faculty advisor. And in fact, like I said, I was a faculty advisor. I see why we do that, and I love it. But just understanding the vulnerability that takes place there from the legal standpoint is really important for students and student media. Thanks.
No,
Josh,
thank
for
you so
sharing.
much, Jessica. That was fantastic. I think information honestly is power, and that your work will be really helpful for staff advisors and faculty advisors like me when there are questions about, okay, why do you need the space? Why do you have the setup, with administrators that just don't know and they're not familiar to the level that we are with student media. I will tell you that from previous experiences that I have seen, student media have challenges, particularly when it comes to that structural area. They are finding that their administration, based on the administrative budgets, are trying to take their spaces. They are, sectioning off parts of their offices and say, this is not your office anymore. We're going to share it with Veteran Services or another registered student organization. They are finding that they're moving because of space limitations on campus, that institutions are encroaching on areas that have historically always been theirs. So how do we, I'm going to just ask one question because we're going to move on to Wesley after this, but like, how do we find balance? How do we help our students have conversations to ensure there's a balance between institutional needs, because those are valid, and
Right.
protecting the student press?
Yeah, so one of our big conclusions is that there's no perfect system for everybody. I'm really excited to hear what Wesley has to say, because I did work in an HBCU, and I know the culture in an HBCU is very different from, especially a small one, is very different from, the University of Florida or Indiana University or any of, those large ones. But some big things to take away from this is, one, I really think student outlets need to be a lot more transparent about the money that they get. And they should do this with their audiences, the money they get, how it's used, if they have an advisor, what role that advisor plays, where is their newsroom, how did they get access to that newsroom, like, and just staying really open and honest with their audiences, because when that stuff is threatened, they can go back and say, hey, we've been doing this for you, and we provide this amazing service, and here's all the reasons why your money matters to us, because it is eventually, essentially the students' money. And they're trying to take it away, and they're trying to take it away for a different reason, and it might not be the reason that you want. And so, I think that, number one, these outlets need to be a lot more transparent. They should have a page. We actually talk about the Flat Hat out of William and Mary College. They have an amazing website where they discuss like the breakdown of all their revenue, how their advisor plays a role. And yeah, they're a private institution. They have different rules they can play by, but I want to see every outlet do that. That's really great. The other thing I would love to see more outlets do is really take the time to sit down with the administration and set up a designated public forum, or some kind of structure, very, very purposeful structure, to make sure that it's clear from all sides what the purpose of the student outlet is. And even if there is a faculty advisor, or if they're in a campus building, kind of just making sure it's on paper that that doesn't mean you have control over the content, or it doesn't mean that you can just take the funding away because you don't like the way that they're running their institution in whatever fashion. And so, there are some things that we can do to set it up, or you can try to separate completely and get those funders. If, alumni networks are really good for that, but not every institution can do that. And I want to be aware of that as we move forward, because it's not possible everywhere, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. And so now I have the pleasure of announcing Wesley Wright. He is the Assistant Director of Student Media at Florida Atlantic University, one of my favorite people in college media. So glad that he's here today to talk to us about the Renews Project, which is a collaboration among several vendors, several national college media associations, to restart dormant student newspapers on HBCUs and HSI campuses. So Wesley, again, thank you for being here today. I love you. You're fantastic. So just talk to us just a little bit about the collaboration supporting Renews and what the goal of Renews is.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, for the introduction. I do appreciate it. So in general, we started the Renews Project because back in early 2020, we realized a lot of HBCUs were cutting staff members, to Jessica's point, people who were advisors. They were cutting student media budgets, and there were plenty of schools where they might have had a campus news outlet, 6, 7 years before that, and it went dormant, either because of a budget issue, or maybe there was a dedicated group of students and those students graduated and there wasn't really anybody behind that. So our aim was to kind of restart these outlets twofold. One was to prepare students who might want to go into professional media of some sort. For, as a lot of you know, if you're not doing it in college, it's much harder to do it after you've graduated. In the ideal world, you have a chance to make your mistakes if that's going to be the case, or to learn how to do this stuff before you get to the professional world. And then on the other side is, and I believe Nicole mentioned this, Northwest as an example, some student media is the only people or the only reporters covering a certain part of their state, right, or their county or whatever. So it's twofold. A lot of times, students, in my experience, they might have an interest in journalism, but they don't have an outlet where they can figure out, okay, how do reporters do what they do? How do I approach an interview? How do I figure out what's newsworthy and what might not be? Those are all things that we help out with. We've done several institutions so far in Louisiana and New Jersey, and we're getting ready to do South Carolina later this spring.
Awesome. So, and just making sure I remember correctly, you've been at Coppin State, you've been at Spelman, you've been at Southern. I'm curious about the South Carolina school as a South Carolina girl.
Yeah, it's South Carolina State University, which is in Orangeburg.
Yep. No, that's definitely a worthy project. Excited to hear that. Talk to me a little bit about how collaboration can help assist and aid with securing student press freedom.
Yeah, so one of the things to think about, a lot of times with this project, we're dealing with students who they may, an example is Southern, right? So I went to Southern last March, and they had a student media outlet going already, but there were several stories that the students might have wanted to work on, but they were afraid of retribution. So, as somebody who's in college media, I'm used to hearing that. But if I was 18 or 19 and had this big story potentially in front of me, I have no idea if the university can attack me. People were worried about, what if I do this story, but I can't get in the class I want, or phantom tickets show up on my car when I park. So a lot of what we did in that scenario was explain to them, you have these, if that's my email, I apologize. You have these resources that you can use if you feel like you're being retaliated against, or if you feel like I want to have an interview with this administrator about this story, but the school is making it more difficult than they should because they know the nature of it. So a lot of it is just showing them, hey, other people have done this before who have attacked it, or other people care enough about you to help you out in that scenario. And the Student Press Law Center has been integral in helping us kind of show these students, here's what you should do. Or if you want a public record and your university takes 6 weeks to give it back, here's how you can respond. Or here are the lever that you can pull. If they zig, then you can zag this way. And that helps the students a lot to figure out, okay, the same stories I might see someone do at the Duke Chronicle or the Daily Nexus, I can see what they look like on my particular campus, and not necessarily have to worry about getting kicked out of class, or I want to become a student leader for some organization, and they make it more difficult because I'm also writing an investigative story on student government or whatever it might be.
No, I think that's great. I think the fear of operating within their ecosystem, their campus, and the unfortunate tangential kind of and potential repercussions that are outside of their role as a journalist, but their role as a student. I think that's a real fear that a lot of our students have. So thank you for talking on that a little bit, especially when you're bringing back something, when you have or even when you have a new publication. Legacy media, they're grandfathered in. They have a certain reputation. They've been doing this for decades. I know even at UAB, Kaleidoscope, our student newspaper, is actually older than the university. So there's a little bit of leeway there when it comes to press freedom. When you're brand new on the scene, building those relationships and building that reputation can be very difficult. So when you're resetting these programs, when you're bringing them back from being dormant, how do you intentionally reset them to ensure their press freedoms? And how does policy come into play?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing I'll show them, and I think I mentioned it in my last answer briefly, was I'll show them other reporters. So if a student wants to report on there's student government, or in my case, I work at a university where student affairs helps fund our student publications here. But I tell the students, look, if you were to find something about the Division of Student Affairs, you should report on it. A lot of times, if I show them another student doing it or a professional, it kind of takes away some of the ambiguity about how they should approach it or the way they should go about their reporting. If I show them someone else doing it, they can see, okay, well, it's not rocket science. I can do that. I can pick the phone up if need be. And then as far as policy, I'll make sure that the students know, and this is, in some ways, it might be more symbolic than not, but it hasn't happened yet where we have the university trying to intrude on student coverage. But I let them know, because some of them assume this too. Some of them assume, well, I go to this campus, do I have any allegiance, right, to the campus? And I let them know you don't necessarily, right? There isn't really a scenario where you have to pull your punches. And then they kind of see like, okay, well, if I was a student and I didn't work reporting, I would want to know if there was mismanagement, right? Or if there's a professor who's sexually harassing a student. These things are public concern. So usually after I show them what other reporters have done and the way it's worked in the past, they understand that, okay, we have a responsibility to cover the campus the best that we can, and we should do that, and we should be able to do that, excuse me, without having to worry about the university intruding. Thankfully, we haven't had it happen yet, but the part of that is, and the administrators will say, if we go to a campus, they might say, well, what if the students start doing X, Y, and Z? And right now, the students might be too new to attack a story that might be advanced. But down the line, I can see where a student kind of gets more comfortable and wants to do a story that has more teeth to it. And I let them know that we're around and there's plenty of other resources of people that can help if that ends up being the case.
Awesome. I have one final question, and I actually want to pose this to all of our panelists. And I want to start with Wesley and then go to Jessica and then Nicole. Just as a fun fact, last week I was working on my departmental budget for student media. And as per every single year, my boss asked me, what's next for student media? And I told her if I knew that, I would be a consultant and I would probably make a lot more money than I do now. So I'm going to pose the same question to you. My budget is in, so I can't change it. So when you look at the landscape of college media, when you look at the landscape of higher education in this country, what is next? What is the future of student media? What direction are we going in? I'm going to start with Wes.
Okay, yeah, that's a good crack at it. One thing that I will say the students are doing much more than I did when I was in college in student media was looking at how their institution falls in the political sphere. So at a campus like mine, I'm at a public university, but I know that when I was 19 or 20, I was not thinking about, well, if something happens in Tallahassee or Raleigh or wherever, what does that mean for our campus? And now living in a state like Florida, there's no way to divorce the two, really. But it's good for student reporters because they see, okay, well, not only did what's happening in the state capitol impact campus, but so does our reporting. You know, and even at a private institution, there are ways that, for example, I've worked with Spelman College in Atlanta, and I've told them, well, there are all kind of ways. Originally, the staff was telling me, well, we want to do public records reporting, but we're private. And I told them, well, if you have interaction between the city of Atlanta and your campus, or Fulton County, Grady County, and your campus, those are records that are public. So I think that a lot of times students might feel like, well, public records reporting is for like the special forces, people who have been around a long time, or they know what they're doing, but it's not. There are all kind of ways that government institutions deal with your campus. And I think that in years to come, that'll become even more relevant as we see maybe these budgets are getting slashed for reasons that might be nefarious, maybe they aren't, or we even may see later on, and someone mentioned this before, more hostility toward, I think it was Mike, hostility toward reporters in general. Those are all things that are relevant to a college newsroom, especially when you're part of the community that you cover. So a lot of times, if I was at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and wrote a story about Georgia Tech that people didn't like, I can hypothetically just go home and cut my email off, maybe, and it won't bother me as much. But if I go to school at Georgia Tech, I have a real responsibility to the community. And you have to keep that in mind in your reporting and in the research you do for your reporting. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, especially at public universities in the years to come.
Thank you. Jessica, what's next? What's the big trend for student media coming up?
One big thing that we really saw and we didn't get a chance to look into as much as we wanted to was this pressure from the students themselves on the content that the publications are pursuing. And I think that's a really interesting trend to see, you know, the trigger warning mentality kind of being added in to the amount of pressure that's already on student media. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting road for student outlets to be playing both advocates for freedom of information and advocates for free speech, but also balancing on that line of, you know, well, this is really sensitive information that some of our population might be uncomfortable with, and how do we play that out? And so I think a big thing that we're going to see coming up in the next couple of years is challenges from the community censorship side, and how do we handle that pressure from our own communities?
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. We had a student government official step down and make a public Instagram post about why he was stepping down. And when the student newspaper reported it, his friends kind of bandied together and said that this is an invasion of his privacy using the photo that he sent to USGA to represent him and using the Instagram post that he posted publicly. It was definitely a media literacy moment. Nicole,
Yeah, and I know that
you are of the generation that is going to make the future of media. So I'm leaning on you.
Yeah, I would say I think student media is now leaning more towards kind of filling that local news desert that is growing and growing, especially with the Daily. You know, we work really hard to cover Evanston as hard as we do to cover Northwestern, and those two things are pretty balanced. So I would say, especially with you know, universities that are in areas without maybe a daily local publication, that's something that the students can really do to help out. And you know, students do know what's going on in their communities as well as in their universities. So I think that's something that the trend is definitely leaning towards right now.
Awesome. So we have about 5 or so more minutes. If there are any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. There is a question if the slides were going to be available after this presentation. I'm going to let our SPL friends let us know if we can share Jessica's slides.
Honestly, I didn't produce anything in the slides that's not in the report that's already on the website. So I highly recommend just going and looking at the report. I think it's going to be more helpful than my like dinky slides anyway.
Your slides were great. Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Are there any other audience members that have questions? I'm going to give it a minute for you to type.
Jackie, I did want to address
Yeah,
the question I saw in the chat
Mhm.
about underground papers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this idea of underground papers is really interesting, but I think more so it's probably the term that we're looking at now is alternative, right?
Right.
Alternative to
Right.
the what we would view as mainstream. And I can't say this person, Tirani. I hope I said your name right. I hope that whatever you're trying to start up, all you're doing is trying to pursue ethical, good journalism, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're alternative or underground or whatever, that if you're doing it right, you don't have to be underground. You can be just as main as the rest of us. So
yeah. No, I completely agree. I love news startups. I love journalism startups. I love new projects, which is probably why I'm always stressed out. But if you are trying to start an alternative publication or outlet, you don't have to be underground. You don't have to be hidden. I think a lot of our College Media Association advisors are happy to help and guide and provide support for something that's brand new. One of the, I talked a little bit earlier about what is the future of student media? I get asked that question. And I really think some of it is making space for entrepreneurial once off media outlets that no, you don't have to be part of the mainstream or legacy media outlet. If you want to create something just for your niche and you want to own it yourself, and then when you graduate you take it with you, we will be there with support, with advice, with guidance, with equipment, and with space. Okay, so there's a question here. I think, Jessica, you might be able to answer this. How can students move their official organization more towards independence?
It's a hard one. Definitely sit down with, whoever, all the stakeholders involved, and talk about, well, if you want to be completely independent of the institution, what needs to happen? How does that advertising need to come in? Is there sponsorships? Is there a alumni network you can lean on? Talk to maybe the SPLC or another law group about finding, a 501c3 status, or creating a board to kind of act as that heat shield for you. Put together a statement of designated forums so that the institution and you can come to that public understanding that, yeah, this outlet is independent and their views do not represent the institution at large, and we don't interrupt their process in any way. And so there are some things that you need to be discussed before you can do full independence, like from the get-go. But if you can get that way, then I really hope, the further away from that tie you can get, the better off you are, to sustain autonomy and independence.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour, and I just want to thank our panelists for engaging in this discussion. I hope that everyone had at least one takeaway. I want to thank our friends over at the Student Press Law Center for all of their incredible work day to day assisting our student outlets. I always tell my students, hey, you need to call this SPLC. I'm not a lawyer. I pretend to be one, but they are actually lawyers. So please call them. I encourage you to engage with the rest of our Student Press Freedom Day events throughout the week, which you can find on SPL's website, splc.org. And if you have the ability to, I encourage you to donate. SPLC is a wonderful organization that is a nonprofit and runs off the donations from people like you. So if you have the time and a couple of bucks to spare, please send it SPLC's way. Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
What a great conversation. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the world of student journalism, all we can say, it is changing. We are not sure where we're going to land, but we are so grateful that we have people that are still committed to what it is that journalism is all about, and are looking to be our next generation doing that. So thank you guys very much. This is good stuff.